Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Sunday Symposium. Today, I've got a very special guest on the podcast. His name is Jordan Hattar. He's founded and he helps to run a charity called Help for Refugees, which is based in Jordan. He lives on the outskirts of Amman, and that's where he's joining me from today. We're going to talk about all things to do with helping refugee communities working in the Zaatari refugee camp, as well as spreading the awareness of issues surrounding those communities around the world. So, hello, Jordan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. Can we start off, please, just by talking a bit about Help for Refugees? What is this organisation that you are part of?
Yeah, it all started when I was studying Arabic in university in California. And my Arabic professor, she's from Syria, and this was the start of the Syrian conflict, 2011. And, I wanted to do something. So I ended up taking a semester of academic leave and coming here to Jordan to see how I could help. And I started this small charity, Help for Refugees, in order to try to meet the needs of the refugees because they were telling me their stories, and what they were saying their needs were different than a lot of the other charities that were working on the crisis. So that's why my idea started, maybe I should create my own charity.
Right. What made you? What ideas are you talking about there? Then, and how did you feel that their needs were perhaps different from what they were being offered by the charities?
Yeah, I got there at close to the inception of the Zaatari refugee camp. So it opened in late summer, early autumn of 2012.
This is one of the largest refugee camps in the Middle East, isn't it? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, and is the first Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, and a lot of the refugees were telling me their biggest need was housing. The refugees were living in tents, and I would talk to the families, and kids would be dying in the camp. I won't forget, listening to the people plead for better conditions, and the caravans. That's what they were requesting. These prefabricated housing units, a British term, caravans, and they were just like, we need, and the help was just not coming adequately enough. Yeah.
Do a lot of the refugee communities where you are they offered help by the UN, for example, the UNHCR most of the time?
Yes, but there's a lot of gaps too, and so you have refugees that there's more than 1.3 million Syrians here in Jordan, but not all of them have refugee status. I mean, it's a bordering country, so it'd just be like, if there was a huge crisis in France, there will already be, French citizens in the UK, right? And so it's some of them just overstayed their visas, or they're illegally in Jordan, so that creates problems on getting job opportunities. So then it's not as easy to get help from the UN if you fall into one of those categories. But the UN is doing an incredible job, and UNHCR, which is like the refugee branch of the UN, they administer the Zaatari refugee camp. There's 2 refugee camps here in Jordan. Most of the refugees live outside the 2 camps, most Syrian refugees.
So you were studying Arabic, and then you got inspired to set up your own organization. How did you go about doing that? What were kind of the steps that you took on that journey?
Well, emotionally, I took a lot of steps. I was I'll never forget my Arabic teacher in tears. 2 of her cousins were killed in Damascus in Syria. And I remember her telling me this story, and I felt like I had to do something. And I really didn't know how to go about it. But I remembered what Deng had told me, Deng Jongkuch. He was a Sudanese lost boy that I went to South Sudan with. So I took a gap year instead of going to university, and I went with Deng to his home village in Jonglei State, South Sudan. This was a year before independence, so this is 2010.
Mm.
And he said, Jordan, you don't always need a specific skill to make a difference. Just the heart. That's the first thing. And then you can acquire the skills. And so I thought, okay, well, I need to find out how I can help. And my Arabic teacher said, don't go to Syria. And so I said, okay. She said, but you could help in one of the neighboring countries. And so I just showed up here. I showed up at the UN headquarters and said I wanted to work in the camp. At 20 years old, they pat me on the back and they say, that's great. They said, are you a journalist? And I said, no. They said, do you work for a UN charity group? I said, no. They said, well, then you can't work in the camp. And so I decided to set up Help for Refugees in response to them saying I needed to be part of something. And so I became a journalist for Help for Refugees. And actually I was able to get on, after sending my articles to 100 different, literally 100, I would send every single night, just no one would take my stuff. I finally got through and got on BBC World News Radio and BBC TV. Wow. And that was to try to just share these stories, because I believed that some of the stories I was hearing just weren't getting out to the world.
So in effect then, you're using a wide range of skills there to start up this organization. That's fantastic. And so you got on the news, and then did you start off by being based in Jordan? Did you start off by being based from where you were living initially in the States? I imagine you're American, right? I'm right in saying that. So how did you get started kind of in a practical sense with funding and things like that?
Yeah, I found this summer teaching program in Jordan that would pay for my airfare round trip. So that was a way to get airfare taken care of. And then I would just do fundraisers in my community, at my university. And I would get enough to find out how we could get these caravans so I was able to deliver 2 caravans to the refugee camp with a friend of mine. And, it's easy to say that that's just a drop in the ocean. And there's some truth in that. When you look at, maybe we can get a picture of the Zatari camp up, helicopter, view from above. I mean, this camp's it's a city. And what difference is 2 caravans going to make? But, I really believe in ripple effects. So my goal was not to I knew I couldn't deliver caravans for every single family, but I went to the UN spokesperson who I had built relationships with. And so my idea was, who have I built relationships with during my study abroad program and while I was a journalist in the camp. And I really believe in the power of relationships. And this UN guy told me, okay, Jordan, we can partner together. So I partnered with UNHCR and at 21 years old, and sure enough, they were true to their word and helped me deliver these caravans.
Fantastic. So how has your charitable organization grown then since that time when you started it up? How has it changed?
So at first it was the physical needs of the caravans, and then after that it became addressing a lot of the misperceptions that people have about refugees. And after interning in the White House with Michelle Obama, I thought, given the whole political discourse in this world, I mean, I was in Cambridge during Brexit, and I was in the White House during, when Trump was elected. And I felt like there was a lot of media, not just politicians, but media too, that were showing the fearful part, the fearful component of refugees. And I thought, I need to find out how much truth there is in that. And I need to also share, I'm not trying to change people's minds. I just want to also share the potential of refugees. Because, when I was back in the camp, they would show me footage from Syria. I mean, you've been to Syria. I was never able to get into Syria. And they would show it to me on their smartphones. And sometimes it would even be an iPhone. And I share that because, Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, his biological father is from Syria. And I would meet people from homes where Steve Jobs' father is from. And I remember thinking, did Steve Jobs' father ever intend to have a son that would go on to create Apple and the iPhone and the MacBook. And then people from his home village were showing me the last seconds of people's lives on the device that his son created. And it just reminds me that the next refugee could be the next Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Amazing story. So you must meet a whole range of people with such amazing stories of what's happened to them and how they've obviously left home for pretty violent reasons. How do you yourself deal with that? Because you're out on your own. You've got your own independent organisation. How do you ensure that the people that you're meeting, you're talking to them in a way which is caring for their needs, I suppose?
I guess I'd answer that in two ways. The first is, how do you emotionally deal with some of the stuff yourself? Because in the humanitarian world, I mean, as you know, it's emotionally draining sometimes. It's the secondary trauma. And Ben Frenzicks, a Nuremberg prosecutor, he says it's very simple. If you're crying on the inside, you better be laughing on the outside, or you'll drown in tears. And a lot of my relationships with Syrians don't involve talking about the conflict every day. So remembering there's, looking for the good in situations and in people. That's an important component. But then the other part is just really keeping an ear to the ground, making sure that Help for Refugees addresses what the refugees say is needed the most, not what Jordan or someone with Help for Refugees views. Because I think that's very, I've seen, having that internship in the White House and stuff, and studying international relations and politics at Cambridge, I can see the policy side, but sometimes we can get disconnected. And I think having an ear to the ground and knowing what the refugees want to have advocated for, that's really important for me.
So in a phrase, then you're trying to give them a voice effectively, and help to find out what they want. Fantastic. Well, it sounds like amazing work that you're doing. I've got some questions here that have been put to us by our students in year 11. Absolutely. So they're 16 going on to 17. The first one is, what does a usual day in your life look like for someone who's founded a charity and running your own charity in a country that's different to the country that you grew up in? I mean, it must be quite different to perhaps what you expected it to be when you were younger.
Yeah, when I was 15 or 16, I mean, I wanted to play professional basketball. I'm named after Michael Jordan. My brother's name's Michael.
Are you as tall as Michael Jordan? I can't tell.
But I think it's really important to have dreams, and I really think it's important to try to, some days we're not going to be making huge strides, but it's important just to keep moving forward. And I think during these times of quarantine, that's especially true, because there's always going to be reasons why not to do something. My grandfather always says, do more, not less. And so fighting this urge for procrastination, because, here I am in Jordan at the moment, I can't even go meet with Syrian refugees. So it could be really easy to say, let's just put Help for Refugees on hold. But then I start seeing some of the messages that refugees are sending me that I've built relationships with, and they're saying that we're having a tough time paying rent. Is there any? And so one of the families I had, Syrian refugee families, we did a Zoom call when I got invited to do a Zoom call with a school in Poland, and I thought, why not bring in him? And he's been trying to get financial support. I can just, give the honorarium speaking fee over to him, and this can give him agency. And so him and his family. And so finding creative ways. Right now I'm balancing between studying for the LSAT, the law exam, to go to law school in the US, and also Help for Refugee stuff. But for me, it's about trying to remember the Syrian refugees, that they're the reason Help for Refugees started. And if they're telling me something, that's really important that I focus on their needs to be met. I feel like I'm like DHL, I'm just the
the messenger. That's really interesting. Well, before we move on to the next question, let's talk briefly about the pandemic, because that's obviously changed the way that everyone's working around the world. And we may students listening to this may have seen in the news the pictures of what refugee camps are like in Europe, in Calais, for example, let alone in the Middle East. And you said that the Zaatari refugee camp is very much like a city where it's incredibly hard, I imagine, to do any kind of social distancing. So how has the pandemic changed the way that you operate, and also how has it had an impact on the lives of the people, the refugee communities that you know in Jordan?
Yeah, in terms of how Help for Refugees operates, part of my mission is to share these stories with students and find out how we can make a difference together. So not being able to go around the world doing these speaking tours. So all my school visits have been canceled. But in terms of the refugees here in Jordan, they're not receiving a salary. And so how are they able to keep going? I know some Syrian families that are having an extremely tough time. And they shut down the Zaatari camp, complete lockdown, no one in, no one out. That started in March. And that was before the rest of Jordan started operating in that way. So, but I'm talking to a few refugees in that camp, and there's some incredible stories coming out of what refugees are doing with their time. There's this, it's like this hand sanitizer robot. I don't know if you've seen this thing. It went around the world, this story. It was made in the Innovation Center in the north of this country. And it's this robot that disperses hand sanitizer. It's absolutely incredible. And so right now, students often want to help. And I'm kind of sharing some of these incredible projects that refugees are working on and figuring out how we can, support them.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's go on to the next question then. You've touched on the qualifications that you're studying for and you've done in the past. But the next question from students is, what qualifications do you feel that you need to go into your line of work? I suppose not just working with refugee communities, but in the charity sector generally, because it's quite hard. There's no qualification you can do at school in charity work, is there? So it seems quite non-specific, particularly if you're a 16, 17-year-old, I should think.
I think just jumping in. I think often we want to go. We are often told to go the route of getting the academic relevant degrees and having the experience before we get involved in a field of interest. But my career trajectory has kind of told me it's good to jump in and find out what that if we're interested in diplomacy. Shadowing a diplomat, or we don't always have to have all the experience and the university degrees in order to make a difference. I think if we have a heart, that's a really good starting place. If we actually really care about something, trying to figure out, because our advantage is our optimism and our passion. Sometimes looking at something from a different lens, when I talk and I'll give you a concrete story of what I mean. When I met with the UN spokesperson, UNHCR spokesperson, when I was trying to get those caravans here to Jordan, they said, look, Jordan, we have 8,000 refugees arriving a day. We can barely even support the current projects, let alone because I asked them, why aren't you guys bringing in more caravans? Why is everyone living in tents? And I'll never forget what they told me. They said, it's up to people like you to fill in the gaps. The UN's only as good as we can make it. It's up to other people that can see it from the outside to say, hey, this is needed. This is needed.
That's really interesting, because I think particularly from a young person's point of view, when you think of the UN, you can think of this huge overarching organization that thinks, it tries to cover every base. But to hear your side of the story there, that individual charities kind of help supplement what the UN does, and like yourself working alongside it, that's really interesting. The third and final question from students is about experience, really. And you've touched on your internship there at the White House. So the question is, what experience do you feel most benefited you in in the career that you're doing now. But it'd be fantastic to hear more about your that experience that you had in the White House, really, because that sounds really, really formative.
I think what's helped me through this whole time is knowing that if we're passionate about something, other people will see it. Being around someone we can have our different thoughts on politics and stuff. The thing that was incredible about Michelle Obama was how passionate and charismatic she is. And I watched as other people they wanted to get involved with what someone would do for 20 seconds of her time is incredible. People wanted to be around that source of passion. And for me, I didn't know what I was going to do after the internship. And I had a 3-minute conversation with one of President Obama's good friends. He was Secretary of Education in the US, Arne Duncan. And he said, "What are you going to do next?" And I told him about my work here in Jordan. And then less than a year later, I took him and his family here to Jordan, all because of that 3-minute conversation. And as he was leaving Jordan 5 days later, he said, "I can't believe this all happened from a 3-minute conversation we had." And I remember being so nervous talking to him. It was our first conversation. I said a bunch. But the only thing I can grasp from that conversation is that I showed that what I really cared about. And I think there's a lot of value in sometimes you have to practice being vulnerable to share what you care about. But if you share how passionate you are, sometimes incredible things can happen. And that's how at 25 years old, I was, and this guy actually works with Steve Jobs' widow, Lorraine Powell Jobs, with Emerson Collective. So it was like this ripple effect, because I was like, wow, if I'm able to, yes, I don't have all of the experience, but I had the passion. And so I really hold on to never losing that.
Well, you certainly sound like you haven't lost it in what you've been sharing with us this afternoon. Final thing then, I mean, you've covered so many bases there, and obviously your work and career so far has encompassed a whole wide range of things. If a student was looking to get into charity work, you said to follow their passion, and obviously your passion is ongoing. You're wanting to go into law after this. Is that right? Do you have any final words of advice that you'd give to someone who was about 16, 17, say at school, doing what they would have been doing exams this year? Obviously they've been cancelled, but will be doing their final school exam perhaps in a couple of years.
Well, I think I wrote 3 things on a business card after I lived in South Sudan. This teacher in New York said, "You need a business card." I'm like, okay. He said, "Think of 3 things." Then I put awareness, persistence, and heart. What your podcast does in terms of awareness. I watched your incredible video of, going to Calais. I think raising awareness is really important. Yeah. And I think it's not that people don't care in this world. It's that people often don't know. And so getting to know what my mom told me, "Do you know the state flower of Sudan?" I remember this was one of our arguments about when I wanted to go to South Sudan at 18. And I was like, "Why does it matter?" And she's like, "You need to know." Her point was, you need to know. Persistence. Some of the most rewarding things I think that have happened in my life required persistence. Took me 8 different tries to get into the White House. And the last one is just heart. I think, doing something and often following our heart requires not following. Sometimes it's not the most prestigious thing. My boss in the White House said, "Follow your passion, not prestige." And just looking for opportunities on who to partner with, because I don't think anyone can solve a conflict by themselves, but look at who inspires us. For me, I guess overall, when you look at persistence, awareness, and heart, it's also about figuring out who else has that. Like who inspires me, because who are the people that inspire us? Maybe we should try to be around those people more.
Jordan Hattar, thank you so much for your inspirational words this afternoon. It's been great, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm hopefully doing a Zoom call with your school in September. So I very much look forward to hopefully talking to you guys more then.
Excellent. So guys, if you're listening to this, you'll get a chance to talk to Jordan live, and you can ask him some questions then. But it's been fantastic.